Welcome back to Finance 3.0, your daily dive into the seismic shifts reshaping our global financial landscape. I'm Asha Semenova, and today we're unpacking a story that didn't just happen in backrooms or bureaucratic communiques, it happened on the main stage of global politics. The leaders of China, Russia, and India, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Narendra Modi, all sat down together at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin. Now, you may be thinking, another international meeting, another round of handshakes and speeches. But this one? It carries consequences for the dollar, for global trade, and for the balance of power between East and West. Let's break down what was said, what it means, and why Western nations are suddenly paying a lot more attention. First, a little context. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, started back in 2001 as a regional security bloc. At the time, it was mostly about counterterrorism and border management in Central Asia. Fast forward 2 decades, and it has quietly grown into the world's largest regional organization by population, covering nearly half the globe. Its members now include China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and several Central Asian republics, with observer states and dialogue partners stretching from the Middle East to Africa. In other words, it's no longer a niche forum, it's a platform representing the heart of the so-called Global South. And this year's summit in Tianjin, China, brought something new, a convergence of purpose between Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi. Let's start with Xi. He walked into this summit with a very clear script. The global order, he argued, is broken. Western hegemonism, his polite way of saying U.S. dominance, has run its course. What he offered instead was a Chinese-backed multipolar world with the SCO as its laboratory. Xi made several concrete offers. Financial carrots, $280 million in aid for SCO members, plus concessional loans for infrastructure projects. Institutional ambition, a proposal for an SCO development bank that could rival institutions like the IMF and World Bank in certain regions. Tech and AI leadership, plans for an SCO artificial intelligence cooperation center. This is Beijing trying to shape not just hardware and infrastructure, but also the next generation of algorithms and governance standards. This was more than speech-making. It was a blueprint for an alternative system of money, technology, and influence, all outside of Washington and Brussels. Now, Putin had every reason to clap along. For Russia, isolated by Western sanctions over Ukraine, SCO is a lifeline. He used the stage to argue that the SCO proves multilateralism isn't dead, it's just moving away from the West. His emphasis was on energy trade, expanding pipelines, oil sales, and gas exports to SCO partners. De-dollarization, more use of rubles, yuan, and rupees in transactions. Less dependence on Western clearing systems, and less vulnerability to sanctions. For Putin, this wasn't just ideology, it's survival. If SCO can become a parallel economic network, Moscow gets breathing room. But here's the twist. Modi wasn't there to endorse Beijing and Moscow wholesale. India's strategy is what analysts call strategic autonomy. He did make history by showing up. It was his first trip to China in 7 years, and his meeting with Xi Jinping produced visible thaw. Direct flights between India and China will resume. Visa restrictions are easing. Some export controls are being rolled back. He also sat down with Putin and reaffirmed energy cooperation, continuing India's purchases of discounted Russian oil despite U.S. pressure. But Modi kept his cards close. India didn't join Xi's call for a new development bank, nor did it fully embrace China's AI vision. Instead, it positioned itself as a swing state, close enough to benefit, distant enough to keep options open with the West. So why does all this matter? Because when you put these 3 leaders together, you're looking at a bloc that represents 3 billion people, nearly 40% of humanity. Nuclear powers with vast military reach, energy superpowers in Russia and Central Asia, a rising tech hub in China, and a growing consumer market in India. That's not just noise, it's a serious counterweight to Western institutions. Now, let's look at the ripple effects, because this is where it gets interesting. 1. Erosion of dollar dominance. If more trade in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East settles in yuan, rubles, or rupees, then the dollar's global share shrinks. For the West, that means sanctions lose bite. You can't freeze accounts in New York if the accounts never touch New York. 2. Parallel tech ecosystem. An SCOAI hub plus Chinese digital infrastructure could lock developing countries into Beijing's ecosystem. Western firms may find themselves boxed out of key growth markets or forced to play by Chinese rules. 3. Strategic pressure on the West. The US and Europe desperately want India as a counterweight to China. Watching Modi sit beside Xi and Putin complicates that narrative. The more India hedges, the harder it is for the West to build a neat Indo-Pacific strategy. 4th, global South leverage. If SCO can offer fast financing and infrastructure with fewer political strings, countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East gain leverage. They can play East and West against each other to get better terms. Scenarios for the next 24 months. Let's game out a few possibilities. Scenario 1, functional hedging, most likely. India keeps balancing. SCO expands local currency settlements. The Development Bank moves slowly, but begins pilot programs. For the West, the effect is gradual dollar erosion and a creeping loss of sanction power. Scenario 2, alt stack build-out. Xi succeeds in launching the SCO Bank and AI Center. Standards diverge, and suddenly there's a second global financial and tech stack. Multinationals face compliance nightmares and IP risks. Scenario 3, optics outrun substance. Border tensions reflare, India pivots back toward the US, and SCO's grand plans stall. The West breathes easier, but the narrative of a multipolar world still gains momentum. It's important not to oversimplify. These 3 leaders may smile for the cameras, but deep mistrust remains. India and China still have unresolved border disputes. Russia and China may share a short-term agenda, but Moscow fears becoming Beijing's junior partner. India wants growth, not entanglement. So, the Tianjin summit wasn't a hard alliance. It was, at best, a power-sharing experiment. But experiments have consequences. For Washington and Brussels, this summit raises red flags. Dollar leverage is weakening. Sanctions are harder to enforce. Tech standards are fragmenting. Western firms face market access challenges. India is less reliable as a counterweight. It's not abandoning the West, but it's clearly hedging. Global South bargaining power is rising. Countries will demand more favorable terms from Western lenders and investors. In short, the West is losing its monopoly on setting the rules. So what should policymakers and businesses take away? For governments, sweeten India, ties with trade access, supply chain deals, and defense co-production. Double down on AI and financial standards to keep the West's system attractive. Be realistic about sanctions. They'll work less cleanly in a de-dollarizing world. For businesses, prepare for dual compliance systems, one Western, one SCO-centric. Hedge currency exposure. If yuan or rupee settlement spreads, treasury teams need playbooks now. Map supply chains carefully. Sanction risks will show up 2 or 3 tiers deep. So what do we take away from Tianjin? Not the birth of a new Cold War, not the signing of a hard alliance, but the quiet construction of an alternative operating system for global politics and finance. The West still has deep advantages, stronger institutions, more trusted currencies, leading tech firms, but the monopoly days are over. The SCO summit made that loud and clear. And if you're trying to understand the next decade, this is the signal. The world isn't splitting into 2 camps. It's fracturing into multiple poles. For investors, governments, and ordinary people, that means uncertainty, complexity, and new risks, but also new opportunities. That's it for today's episode of Finance 3.0. If you found this breakdown useful, share it with someone who still thinks geopolitics is just theater. Trust me, the stagecraft matters, but the real drama is in the consequences. Until next time, stay sharp, stay curious, and keep your eyes on the tectonic shifts shaping tomorrow's economy. I'm Asha Semenova, and I will see you next time.